Today's show is sponsored by Yafa Bay and her Spirit of Tepereth Metaphysical Marketplace, here to provide you and your naturally special gifts with guidance and support through your life's journey, providing you tools such as candles, incense, charms, jewelry, oils, crystals, and much more. Visit them at 1273 West Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio, or online at spiritoftepereth.com. You can find all our sponsors' information in the show notes on our website. Now let's start the show.
The controversial group leading the charge, ADOS, or the American Descendants of Slavery. The controversial group ADOS, or the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS, the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS.
Welcome to the Articles of ADOS podcast, a weekly show where we bring you undiscussed news, articles, and information important to the American descendants of slavery, our friends, and our allies. You can find us every Friday, 10 a.m. on WCRS 92.7 and 98.3 here in Columbus, Ohio. Or you can also listen on your favorite podcast app. This is episode 27. I am your host, Lisa Todd, along with my co-host,
Daud Giazan. On today's show, we will share articles from Black Agenda Report, The Conversation, The Appeal, TheRoot.com, History.com, and Politico.com. Later in the show, stay tuned for our main event, where we dive into and interview the article, Here's How the Attorney General Put the Fix In for the Cops Who Killed Breonna Taylor.
Personality. Peace.
This week in our personality piece, I'm going to pose a question that forces us to have personalities and maybe dance a jig or two.
I'm known to cut a rug from time to time. What are the questions you have for us this week?
Let's address the elephant in the room.
Okay, which one of are you ready to talk about?
The Yvette, Carnell, and Antonio Moore one.
Uh-oh.
The damned if you do, damned if you don't, quote-unquote leaders of the ADOS movement.
Ah, yes.
Over the past couple of weeks, there's been a lot of uproar over whether or not they support your ideas, your initiatives in a way that you deem important to the ADOS movement. I think ever since the first annual conference, people were really excited. People had came out of that with a lot of ideas, things they wanted to do on behalf of ADOS movement. Chapters, of course, sprouted up more so across the country, and everyone, got politically motivated to do something. And in that, everyone had ideas, some good, some bad. And because Antonio and Yvette didn't support your ideas, support your campaign, support your PACs, support your marches, support whatever idea you had and wanted to do, they were damned if they didn't and damned if they did support it. So I want to speak to the damned if you do, damned if you don't aspect of their leadership. And a lot of people feel that they shouldn't be called leaders, but they created hashtag ADOS. They created it. So why wouldn't they be the leaders of that? And I understand behind the scenes things go on, but why wouldn't they be the leaders of that? And also want to speak to, am I throwing too much out? I also want to speak to, yes, you can disagree. You can be, have a different idea than the leaders. But what do you do when that happens? You don't have to blindly follow anyone. You don't have to be involved in what you started out. If your views change, if things change and you want to align differently, then everyone has the freedom to do that. But can you speak to all three of those things in order? And
good luck with that. Well, the damned if you do, damned if you don't. In all organized movements, whether it be military, corporate, or grassroots types of organizing for political and social movements, there's always going to be dissension. There's always going to be disagreement. The issue is, how do you compensate to keep focused on the course that the movement, organization, or military is moving on? In the military, hierarchy is definitely identified. You know who you are, you know what your status is, and if you hate what your leader in that situation is doing, it doesn't matter. In corporations, there's a little bit more flexibility, but ultimately the paycheck keeps you going on the hamster wheel. And you may have a position that allows you to have input and have effect. At the same time, grassroots movement, of course, same dynamic, but a lot more flexibility. Now, add to that what I shared on our previous episodes, we have a population of survivors of intergenerational tragedy, and so a lot of us are burdened by the need for healing, emotional stuntedness, and a desire for justice. All that combined, the very challenges that we're seeing here, or the damned if you do, damned if you don't leadership, occurred with Marcus Garvey, occurred in the 1950s and 60s with the Civil Rights Movement, and are occurring now. Again, the issue becomes how well we recoup from such challenges and stay focused on the course. Thus, the need for structure and standards that we've argued about and talked about on our program, and that seems to be what's happened here recently. So what comes about is that people have their needs and drives, and they're either being attended to. The challenge for leadership is to maintain course as the leadership see it, and people's willingness to have not an allegiance to the leaders, but to what the leadership is about, the end goal. And that's where we should be. So one of the things that struck people emotionally was how they would all too often have to delineate our struggle from others' status and comments, whether it be other people that are on the same line as they have been, such as Tariq Nasheed, or other celebrities that have been out there. And some of what's happened internally in people's emotional states is that they felt, rather uncomfortable with our leadership commenting, all too often critiquing other people, like celebrities, and what they were offering to the table. They had to delineate if they were off course, those celebrities, while people within the group felt, well, if you're going to trash them, criticize them, which is an adult, mature thing to do. If you're going to criticize them, you may alienate them, and therefore their status and their access to capital may be not coming our way because of that. And that's a challenge. Well, in fact, that's really a temptation to not stay on your course. But that's another definition of good leadership. They stayed on their course by delineating the differences and criticizing the shortcomings when it was going to not meet our end goal. And they were criticized for that. Well, they shouldn't have been, as it turns out, because we happened along the fantastic response of Mr. Ice Cube, who was mature enough to not take the criticisms as a disrespect or swatting his intentions aside, but he decided to even look out for more experts and include them in his reasoning, and made what he had offered better. So much so that he cooperated with the Southern California group that helped to get the reparations bill passed. That's a sign of maturity that some of our members did not show when they were criticizing our leadership for criticizing him. It made him better, and as a result, it has made us stronger.
Where would you advise people in when they like, I ain't got no leaders. This is the lineage movement.
I understand that. It's popular now. It's called decentralization. And I agree to that to a great degree. The issue is timing. Right now, in the early stages, we're forming with a definite leadership that has an end goal in mind. At some point before we get to the end goal, other leaders will rise, those who are being consistent. And, this is something Yvette herself has even said. And that's what's happening in this time before they've set up structure. So we've got some leaders that are growing and continuing, and therefore there's a multi-headed hydra that are detractors. They're going to be detractors, inside and outside, and the powers that be. We all know who they are: white supremacy, white domination, racism, and we're going to have a multi-headed hydra of leaders. Right now, we're still in the process of developing that, so that's going to come and happen naturally. But to act as though it's intact now, just because some people have some great ideas, it's just not the right time. And they're not wrong for having that drive, but the issue is, for me, is timing. It's going to happen, but not now. It's just too early. We're still forming. We're still developing. Those very leaders.
Yeah, and you're not going to always agree. I don't always agree with what Yvette or Tone has to say. But have your ideas.
Exactly.
Have your plans. Have your whatever it is that you want to do, and pick the ball up and run with it. Who's stopping you? Yvette's not stopping you. Tone's not stopping you. We have this podcast because I had an idea and ran with it.
Plus, I love what she said. She didn't agree with certain approaches to things. She just said, prove me wrong. And it's like people didn't want to hear that for some reason. They just said that, well, they should be following what my lead is. No, you should be doing what you believe, and you will attract the attention. You'll become the centerpiece, and you'll be the leader if that's what you're after. All in all, if you develop it, if you build it, they will have no choice but to come. But right now, no one has built anything more significant than what has gotten all of us to be ADOS activated. And that's been Tony and Yvette. And they deserve props for that. Not worship, just props, because they could be criticized for at the conference. I'll say it. I understand it. As I understand it, they agreed that there should be some sort of economic pact established, but then later they must have rethought that and changed their mind on that. That's an indication of their imperfections, but it does not undermine the ability of them to lead. All it means is that they changed their mind, and because they're not perfect human beings, we should be patient with that. But some people weren't, and that's okay. It takes time for education. It takes time to get over some emotional things that we believe that they should do. The issue is what is knowledgeable and what's accessible, and that is a standard. And they have done a really good job of setting standards. Yes, people that you admire may be pissed from them setting standards and establishing structure. But that's for them to get over, not for you to buy into and use that as an excuse to undermine leadership further, because that takes us off our goal.
Amen.
And she made it very clear that at her thing, if people, I know people have to remember
I think
this,
I said that wrong.
forget others, that she's opened up an avenue of which to communicate your ideas to her that'll make her stronger, and then make the team stronger, and make our end goal more achievable. They're not closing off access as though they've got all the answers. That's a good indication that people should have a better appreciation for.
That's true. But when feelings get hurt, my feelings got hurt. Disrespect was felt. Can you work through that? Yes, I think you can work through that because you see and know that there's a higher purpose, which is reparations in the Black agenda. 15
years ago, our children weren't killing themselves like they are now. That's enough for me to keep me focused, even if my feelings get hurt. Catch the fire. If you're ADOS, an ally or friend, we encourage you to connect with a local ADOS chapter and help change your local politics. Our ADOS Ohio chapter in Columbus meets every fourth Sunday of the month. For more information on the time and location, visit adoscolumbus.org. You can also get more information on the ADOS movement, our politics, and the agenda. Please visit ADOS101.com.
Rapid News Reports.
In today's Rapid News Reports, we have some articles that you may have missed, all in some way affect you and your ADOS life. Up first, we have
White people have recovered 60% of the jobs they lost during this recession. For Black folks, that number is far lower. From the publication TheRoot.com, author and writer Anne Brannigan. In a piece published earlier this week, the Washington Post declared the pandemic recession the most unequal in modern U.S. history. It's a bold claim, particularly because the United States has seen the same patterns of inequality, racial disparities, especially come up during economic downturns. But the data backs it up. Mining data from the Department of Labor, the Post reports that about half of the employment lost between February and April has since recovered. But race, gender, and age have defined who has experienced that recovery. I graded this article good. And up next,
from the publication Black Agenda Report, entitled Why They Let Breonna Taylor's Killer Go Free. Tagline: People in Louisville were in motion, but the politicians shy away from the massive transformative changes that we demand. Author Alex N. Press. On September 23rd, Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron announced the results of a grand jury investigation into the events of March 13th. Brett Hankinson, one of the 3 officers present at the raid, would be charged for wanton endangerment for firing shots that hit an adjoining apartment in Taylor's building. None of the officers would face any charges for Taylor's death. Jacobin's Alex N. Press spoke with Robert Levertis Bell, a political organizer, recent city council candidate, and Louisville native, about the events that have unfolded in the city since March. Alex N. Press asks, speaking of segregation, with regard to Breonna Taylor's case, there's been some discussion of the connection between policing and gentrification, that there's a selective targeting of certain blocks, and of the police and their role in Louisville's changing demographics. Robert Levertis Bell responds, I'm not 100% sure, and I don't think anybody is, whether in Breonna Taylor's murder and the targeting of the block in Russell, where her ex-boyfriend was specifically related to efforts to gentrify the neighborhood. We can say definitely that the gentrification of Russell has been on the agenda for the major developers in the city's government, the mayor in particular, for a very long time. Russell is directly to the west of downtown Louisville. It is prime real estate in so many ways and has been for 10 years or so. To what degree that has resulted in over-policing in that neighborhood, and then on top of that this over-policing had to do with the killing of Breonna Taylor, who was not killed in that neighborhood, but her ex-boyfriend, Jamarcus Glover, who was the ostensible target of the raid, allegedly frequented. I don't know, and I don't think anything has been particularly substantiated. But you can say that there is a trend. If you make a place unbearable to live in for the people who live there, you can drive them out. That's been a part of gentrification in a lot of places. I graded this article good. And next?
This election season, fight for principles, not cultural wars. From the publication Desert News, author and writer Brian Holloway. We see echoes of cultural wars past. Anti-immigration sentiment shifted from Europeans to Latinos. Anti-religious sentiment switched from Catholics to Muslim. Today we see President Trump stoking fears of Muslims, migrant caravans, and Black Lives Matter activists to make his supporters feel their lives depend on voting for President Trump. If voters base their vote off a fear of Muslims, are they truly abiding by the American principle of freedom of religion? If someone bases their vote off of their fear they feel toward those protesting for better treatment of Black people, are they truly abiding by the American principle that all are created equal? In the 1960s, the country saw the civil rights movement transform what it means to be American. The Black Americans leading this movement based their movement on principles of the Constitution, that all men and women are created equal. Some white Americans, feeling that their American way of life was threatened, stoked a massive cultural war in response. Any success for those against the civil rights movement was fleeting, as opposition fueled by cultural wars will never ultimately be successful. I graded this article good. And up next,
from the publication The Conversation, entitled Americans Aren't Worried About White Nationalism in the Military Because They Don't Know It's There. Tagline, there is a long history of links between white nationalist movements and the U.S. military, written by Beth Daly. White nationalist groups, who make up some of the most serious terror threats in the country, find new members and support in the U.S. military. These groups believe that white people are under attack in America. More than 1/3 of service members surveyed in 2018 said white nationalism is a significant threat to the country, which is more than were seriously concerned about threats from Syria, Afghanistan, or immigration. White nationalists with military experience have committed acts of violence, usually after leaving the service, like the 1994 Oklahoma City bombing and the 2012 mass shooting at a Wisconsin Sikh temple. But active duty personnel have also been involved in white nationalist activity. In July 2018, a white nationalist was dismissed from the Marine Corps for his involvement in hate groups, including attending the 2017 Unite the Right protest in Charlottesville, Virginia. Lawmakers have been paying attention to the problem. In 2019, the House of Representatives approved a requirement to screen potential military enlistees for signs of white nationalism as part of the Pentagon's annual budget allocation. But the Senate removed that provision before sending the bill to the White House for President's signature. I graded this article good. And next,
How the Black Codes Limited African American Progress After the Civil War, from the publication history.com, author and writer Nadra Kareem Nettle. When slavery ended in the United States, freedom still eluded African Americans who were contending with a repressive set of laws known as the Black Codes. Widely enacted throughout the South following the Civil War, a period called Reconstruction. These laws both limited the rights of black people and exploited them as a labor source. In fact, life after bondage didn't differ much from the life during bondage for the African Americans subjected to the Black Codes. This was by design, as slavery had been a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and the former Confederate States sought a way to continue this system of subjugation. They may have lost the war, but they're not going to lose power civically and socially, says M. Keith Claybrook, Jr., an assistant professor in the Department of African Studies at California State University, Long Beach. So the Black Codes were an attempt to restrict and limit freedom. I graded this article excellent. It details in ways reparations in America is not for slavery only, but the centuries of violence and economic apartheid the U.S. government sanctioned on the ADOS community. So no longer the excuse I didn't own no slaves. You own the privilege to live under an economic system that cultivated, insured, and secured the bodies of those enslaved. And up next,
from the video news service, Roland Martin, entitled, Ice Cube Responds to Critics, Addresses Work on Trump's Platinum Plan, Looks to Set Record Straight. Writer, Roland Martin. Elisa Garza states, we have been organizing for 7 years, if not longer, trying to turn Black Lives Matter into a movement that can impact not just protest, but also policy. I did have a chance to read both versions of the contract with America, and I'm just curious, are there activists or organizers in this movement that you've been connected to who have been doing some of this legislative advocacy and policy advocacy work? Ice Cube responds, yeah, we connected with ADOS to get a bill passed in California. With Governor Gavin Newsom, we passed 3121, which starts the conversation about reparations in California. So we have been connected with, a grassroots organization. We want to connect with as many grassroots organizations who are not connected to any other so-called powers that be, strictly grassroots. And we definitely want to connect with them. People who definitely have no ulterior motives, who really just want to see money get into the hands of the ancestors and families who built this country. I graded this interview excellent, as though Mr. Ice Cube never answered the question as to which grassroots movement he worked with that also developed policy to make Black ADOS lives better in that state. Mr. Martin then asked if he was willing to work with BLM, to which Ms. Garza criticized Mr. Ice Cube for not having a movement behind his agenda, despite the fact that he had identified the ADOS lineage movement. Then she condemned his talking to the Trump administration, who has encouraged white domination racist attacks against her and BLM, as though Mr. Ice Cube is responsible for that. The fact is, Ms. Garza is aware of the critical issues ADOS has voiced of her and BLM, while Mr. Rowland has willingly acted as Black gatekeeper to prevent ADOS's rise, which reveals why he disregarded Mr. Ice Cube's statements regarding his work with ADOS. Within this context, not only was this handled inappropriately, it was symptomatic of how genuine grassroots movements ran and are funded by Black ADOS people have been undermined in previous years, like the antics displayed in this interview. I am confident in believing that the only reason Mr. Ice Cube is getting any heat now, as well as the anti-Semitic media accusations earlier, which was occurring while Mr. Ice Cube was working with ADOS with the SoCal movement, is because of his work with ADOS. Be on guard. Support Mr. Ice Cube, as he is obviously under attack due to his support of us and the ADOS movement. And next,
Trump debate comment pushing Black Americans, others to vote. From the publication Star Tribune, authors and writer Kate Stafford, Jay Reeves, and Christine Fernando. When President Donald Trump refused to outright condemn white nationalists in this week's presidential debate and urged his supporters to monitor polling sites, Portia Robertson was reminded of earlier eras when Black Americans were intimidated at the polls to deter them from voting. Robertson, a 51-year-old Black woman who lives in Detroit, found the comments chilling, but also felt a renewed resolve to vote. For many Black Americans and other people of color, Trump's comments in his debate with Democratic challenger Joe Biden were a harsh reminder that the nation has yet to fully grapple with systemic racism laid bare this year by protests against police killings of Black people, the coronavirus pandemic, and the resulting economic fallout. But they were also a call to action. I hope that we take some of that frustration, anger, and sadness that we've all been feeling for the better part of 2020 and use it to motivate ourselves to go to the polls and make sure we vote, and vote for candidates who really reflect what Black folks need in this country, said Robertson, CEO of the Detroit nonprofit Focus Hope. I graded this article good. And up next,
from the publication The Appeal, entitled "The Minneapolis City Council's Attempt to Defund the Police Was Thwarted by an Unelected Charter Commission." Tagline: contrary to reports, most city council members who ran and won by pledging to advance racial equity tried to do the right thing, but were stalled by a charter commission that overstepped its authority. Writer Scott Schaefer. Last month, the New York Times ran an article by Asted Herdun about politics and police in Minneapolis. By ignoring important context and details, Herndon painted a misleading picture of what happened and what's likely to happen in the near future. He wrote that the Minneapolis City Council's idealistic attempt to change public safety, spurred by young and progressive activists, were thwarted by public opposition and legislative processes. In truth, most of the city council members who ran and won by pledging to advance racial equity tried to do the right and popular thing, but were stalled by an unelected, unrepresentative commission that overstepped its authority. Whatever their legal expertise, the unelected and unrepresentative Charter Commission is not an accurate gauge of policy popularity. The best way to determine that is to have the whole city vote on it. A referendum is exactly what the city council wanted and exactly what the Charter Commission delayed. City council members want to put a similar charter amendment on the ballot in 2021. But this time by padding the process with enough time so that the Charter Commission is unable to run out the clock. I graded this article good. Notice how the New York Times is acting as a restriction to progress of what the people want, which means their act was to undermine democratic outcomes. At the same time, this article reveals the inadequacies of defunding the police, where structures are in place, not just in Minneapolis, to undermine, delay, and prevent any significant cultural or practice changes to American policing, because it serves a purpose that is more important than protect and serve. And next,
why Black athletes' political activism matters. Tagline: surveys suggest they hold sway with Black Americans who've sat out recent elections, a key constituency for winning the election. From the publication Politico.com, authors and writer Christopher C. Towler, Nyron N. Crawford, and Robert A. Bennett III. The night after a grand jury decided not to charge Louisville police officers with the killing of Breonna Taylor, Los Angeles Laker LeBron James, coming off a playoff victory, used the post-game interview to express his emotions about the news. "We lost a beautiful woman in Breonna that has no say in what's going on right now. We want justice no matter how long it takes." What is remarkable about comments like these is how commonplace they are becoming. There is a long tradition of Black athletes engaging in activism, but we have seldom seen so much attention be paid to their political statements and actions, including the recent NBA strike in response to the police shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which spread to the WNBA, MLS, MLB, and professional tennis. The activism of today's black athletes goes beyond speaking out against police violence. James, for instance, also recently formed a group aimed at protecting African Americans' voting rights and encouraging people to vote this fall. I graded this article good. Up next,
from the publication Black Agenda Report, entitled "The United States is a Sick Society That Produced Two Sick Options for President." Tagline: "The United States dictatorship of capital provides the people with a non-choice between two vile and racist presidential candidates." Author Danny Haifong. Trump only made the pandemic even more difficult for his political prospects by pushing negotiations for a second stimulus package until after the election. The move brought widespread criticism from both Republicans and Democrats in Congress. Trump tweeted just hours later that he was ready to sign a stimulus bill on his terms. Such political grandstanding represents the true face of the United States' selfish, racist, and inhumane social order. Still, Biden is not a safe bet to beat a flailing Trump. Biden has spent much of the 2020 election in silence or in a defensive posture. That's because the Democratic Party is itself an institution completely wedded to what Martin Luther King called the triple evils of materialism, capitalism, racism, and militarism. Biden has repeatedly alienated the progressive, younger section of the Democratic Party electorate by boasting about how he beat the socialists in the primary. He has promised to increase the federal budget for the Pentagon and local police while offering nothing but decency and unity to the masses. A sick society risks collapse when confronted with the foundations of its character. Trump and Biden work within a narrow policy framework for this very reason. Take the case of Julian Assange. The U.S. has spent months attempting to extradite Assange for exposing war crimes and rigged elections as bipartisan projects. Trump and Biden's firm opposition to ending the relentless pursuit of Assange is a clear message that the preservation of the U.S. imperial order takes precedence over any differences that may stand between them. I graded this article good. Free Julian Assange. And that's it for this week's Rapid News. All articles featured will be posted in our Facebook group and in the show notes on our website.
Breonna Taylor. Trayvon Martin. Tamir Rice. George Floyd.
Except for a select few eyes right here in our very home who refuse to see the world for what it is today. They neglect the systematic oppression of an entire race just because it don't affect them. It don't hit close to the chest. Why should they be concerned with another black man's death when blacks kill blacks all the time, justifying that hate behind the disguise of black on black crime? Stop it. time for us to become divided. We got a better chance when the entire front's united. So is this the American dream or a white supremacy thing? The alt-rights, the neo-Nazis, or a Klansman scheme? They took off their hoods and they put on a badge, cause under the shield there's no need to hide under the mask. So now they detain, beat, and lynch us in the broad daylight. So, do as you're told, don't speak, just comply or else they got just cause to take a black man's life. Moments past, they make a widow out of a black man's wife. Like jail or the grave is the only black man's right. Revolt, you know what, man? This black man just might kill us, but you cannot kill a black man's life. So racists, come at me, make this black man's night. Cause for my people, you gon' see this black man fight. So I wrote a letter to George Floyd just to update the brother on what's going on around the world today. We got protests, riots, militarized police, tear gas for those who try to protest in peace. We not gonna stop. We gon' stay in these streets till this whole corrupt system is brought to its knees. We paid freedom's price, but equality costs more. They locked up thousands. All they needed was to lock up for. Your life brought joy and hope to your little girl. Your death brought change and inspiration to an entire world. We've had enough. We're tired. We're fed up. Young brothers and young sisters, please keep your heads up. We want so many things that America won't give. We want to love, we want to grow, we want to breathe, we want to live, we want hope and freedom just to be ourselves, and we don't want to be a threat to anybody else.
Bro, he's not moving.
We got allies, so many others got our back, and they fighting with us, even though they not all black. Some people quote Martin Luther King to get us to stop, but he protested peacefully, and he still got shot. So I drop these words in the form of a song for you and so many others I can name, but the list too long. Hands up in unity because our fist too strong. No justice, no peace. Now is that so wrong? And to the oppressors, all lives matter should be true, but all lives can't matter until black lives do.
He is human, bro.
I cannot breathe.
Are you busy? Is the news coming so fast you can barely keep up? No worries. The Articles of ADOS podcast is here to help. Hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening right now, and we'll make sure you stay up to date on the news and information that affects you and your ADOS life.
Tonight, in a rare rebuke, an anonymous grand juror in the Breonna Taylor case now says questions were asked about additional charges, and the grand jury was told there would be none because the prosecutors didn't feel they could make them stick, adding the jury never considered homicide charges because they were not given the option. The 26-year-old former EMT was shot and killed at her apartment in March during a botched drug raid. No officers were charged in her death, though one who's pleaded not guilty was accused of wanton endangerment for firing bullets that ended up in another apartment. Kentucky's Attorney General Daniel Cameron said the actions of the two other officers were justified because they opened fire only after Taylor's boyfriend shot at them first.
The rule of law must apply.
Police say they identified themselves. Her boyfriend insists they didn't. Now the juror says the grand jury didn't agree that certain actions were justified, nor did it decide the indictment should be the only charges in the Breonna Taylor case. A case that has fueled protests worldwide. Today, a Kentucky judge ruled jurors could speak publicly.
But at this time, our clients do wish to remain anonymous. We are still assessing their position moving forward.
Grand jury proceedings are typically secret by law, but previously the Attorney General's office released 15 hours of audio recordings, revealing at one point at least the jurors wanted to hear more.
We don't show all the videos, but just because of time. And we get it.
Kentucky's Attorney General says he disagrees with the judge's decision, but will not appeal it, adding that he only asked for the charges that could be proven under state law. Taylor's family is asking for a new special prosecutor and another grand jury.
Time now for the main event.
In this week's main event, we will interview the article, "Here's How the Attorney General Put the Fix In for the Cops Who Killed Breonna Taylor." Tagline, Daniel Cameron was on point, but the whole justice system is set up to allow for just this sort of travesty of justice. Writer Kali Holloway. I, Daud, will ask the questions while Lisa will give the answers. Greetings, Miss Kali Holloway. Let's get started. In the Breonna Taylor case, there has been a series of tragedies with massive implications, including yet beyond Miss Taylor's murder. Your thoughts?
Every element of the criminal system is implicated in the failure to secure justice for Breonna Taylor. The cops, per the judge who signed off the warrant that set the events leading to Taylor's murder in motion, likely obtained that paperwork using fabricated information.
I understand that even concerns expressed by the judge, Mary Shaw, who granted the no-knock warrant, believes that Detective Joshua Jays lied about the evidence he provided to substantiate the warrant. It turns out that the judge is not pursuing charges, though, but is transferring further inquiries to the FBI.
Shoddy police work saw Louisville law enforcement raid Taylor's home despite the fact that the suspect they sought was already in their custody. The 3 officers who killed Taylor wildly fired more than 30 rounds between them into the darkness of her apartment, pumping at least 6 fatal shots into her body.
It seems as though all the media reports only want to focus on that one shot. The bullet, the coroner indicates, which caused Miss Taylor's death, as though the other shots into her body are meaningless, as though those officers responsible for those 5 shots don't exist and cause no harm to her. It's abominable.
They then ignored their own protocols, compromising the crime scene. And in the aftermath of Taylor's killing, Commonwealth Attorney Tom Wine focused on posthumously smearing Taylor's reputation by attempting to nail her as a co-defendant in a plea bargain deal.
We of the Articles of ADOS find that most atrocious and characteristic of both police departments, judicial institutions, and the media, attempting to criminalize black victims of police negligent or intentional homicides, while providing a myriad of explanations and sympathies for whites who commit mass murders and serial killers who even get shows which display their humanity.
And then there was Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron's seemingly strategic effort to avoid indictments of any of the police officers involved in Taylor's death. In presenting evidence to the grand jury who would decide whether to charge the officers, Cameron ignored multiple witnesses who countered the police contention that they announced themselves before executing a no-knock warrant, and ignored that the lone witness who confirmed that account had changed his original story.
That sole witness, Aaron Sarpy, initially told investigators he didn't hear police announce themselves. 2 months later, he changed his story, only to later recant that story. Still, he was the only one to make the claim, and due to the bravery of one of the jurors who desires for this and other truths to come out, it really appears that A.G. Cameron was bending over backwards not to have the cops charged with Miss Taylor's murder or injury at all.
What's more, after publicly stating that he had provided grand jurors with critical context for every homicide offense, and also presented all of the information that was available, Cameron later revealed the only charge recommended was wanton endangerment. Nonetheless, when he announced that the charges would be filed against just one officer, not for Taylor's murder, but for firing into the apartment of one of her neighbors, Cameron suggested it had been an open and shut case, since the grand jury agreed with his office that the cops were justified in the return of deadly fire after having been fired upon.
Isn't that because ballistics tests have been inconclusive that it was Kenneth Walker's warning shot had even hit an officer? The report further implies that the officer Mr. Walker was accused of shooting may have been hit by friendly fire.
Were it not for one juror's umbrage at being used by the Attorney General as a shield to deflect accountability and responsibility for the lack of indictments, we would likely never have heard the grand jury tapes he reluctantly released Friday afternoon, and even those were edited to remove the instructions given to the jury in its deliberations, keeping the procedures quite intentionally murky.
Now, at the same time, didn't A.G. Cameron claim that he and his staff would only be redacting jurors' personal information? Again, these are signs of his attempting to cover up his and the office's malfeasance in this case. One can only be hard-pressed to inquire how far such practices go. Are protections like this only extended to white men in blue, or whites at large who don't get prosecuted by maneuvers such as this?
In our system, criminal justice isn't the quest for revenge, it's the quest for truth, evidence, and facts, and the use of the truth as we fairly apply our laws, Cameron stated at a press conference he held about the grand jury's decision. Do we really want the truth, or do we want the truth that fits our narrative.
Did he really have the nerve to say that?
It appears that Cameron tacitly scolding the public for demanding police accountability, even as he strategically omitted information to shield officers from the same accountability, wants truth that fits his narrative and that treats Taylor's death has been treated as a minor consequence of an inevitable series of events.
As though the public and black Americans in particular are simply attempting to assert a narrative, despite all this countervailing evidence that he avoided using?
Because of the focus on Taylor's case, this seems shocking, but the other thing that should shock is how completely ordinary this situation is.
Yes, in the Articles of ADOS episode 18, we covered several judicially problematic cases involving ADOS men and women, literally railroaded into the heavy fines, prison terms, loss of children due to the above, and worse.
From start to finish, the actions of Cameron and Wine at the district level have demonstrated the unchecked power of prosecutors and the ways that boundless power corrupts justice.
Very reminiscent of Kamala Harris's practices as AG in California. It is though they acquire their bones for the judicial processing of black bodies, ultimately serving all forms of servitude needs from cheap firefighting to tough on criminalized black women photo ops.
That near limitless control prosecutors exert decides nearly every aspect of criminal cases, starting with the decision of whether a criminal prosecution will proceed and what charges will be brought. Prosecutors essentially determine the plea bargain offered, the means by which 90% of criminal cases are resolved, and reserve all the negotiating power in the deals that result.
Don't judges exert some leverage in the processing of suspects or defendants?
Judges officially set bail, but prosecutors make recommendations on the amount. Jury selection is partly determined at the prosecutor's discretion. All this is particularly worrisome considering the fact that they often work closely with the police day to day, forming professional bonds that call into question prosecutorial impartiality. The saying about a district attorney being able to convince a jury to indict a ham sandwich goes out the window when police are involved. There's so much about the Taylor case that should have raised concerns with the prosecutors involved. Were they truly interested in justice, and yet which they let fall by the wayside? According to the grand jury tapes, after battering their way into Taylor's apartment and killing her in a hail of bullets, police didn't even carry out that search they've gotten the warrant for.
What?
One officer described being confronting by a larger than normal shadow of a person which hews awfully close to the superhuman descriptions of black folks that police often use to justify the fears that led to them to kill.
Even when they claimed it was dark? Really?
Cameron asserted definitively to jurors that Walker had shot an officer, despite a ballistics report that cast doubt on that assumption. Cameron's omission, including presenting the possible offense grand jurors could have levied against the cops, were obviously intentionally made because he thought the cops might face actual consequences. And he made himself into a safeguard against that outcome. I cannot fashion the facts in such a way to meet a narrative that in many ways had already been put out there before the facts had been put out there, Cameron has said about his role in the Taylor's case.
Then he would be compelled to rely solely upon the facts. It doesn't appear that's the case at all here. In fact, as you said earlier, he was attempting to assert his own narrative, which ultimately worked in a way that exonerated the police.
And yet he seems to have undertaken a fairly lackadaisical effort at hiding the fact that that's precisely what he did. Mitch McConnell's former attorney, Donald Trump's champion, and Kentucky's first black elected attorney general, Cameron's handling of the Taylor case essentially has ensured his star will continue to rise in Republican circles. And that ascent is the result of a system that allows ambitious prosecutors to transparently serve anyone but the constituency that needs them most.
Again, depicting Kamala Harris's rise to prominence within the Democratic Party completely. We literally have no friends. The mainstream white domination racist media system, I believe, has also been indicted here. Thank you for your time and your insights on Miss Breonna Taylor's case, Miss Holloway. Well, that completes this interview. Listeners, you can get the link to this full article on our website in this week's show notes. Coming up, we have the commentary on this article. Did we like it? Did we hate it? Stay tuned.
We want to take the time to give our friends and listeners a shout out. Thank you for clicking that subscribe button and for liking and sharing the podcast. You can also continue supporting the show by joining our Patreon, where you can receive exclusive content and promotional items for as little as $3 a month. Sponsoring the show will ensure that we can continue to bring you the news and information important to your ADOS life. So head on over and join us at patreon.com/articles of ADOS. All right, so what did we think of this article?
It was a very good article. Very good article. She touched all the bases. I chose it because she did straightforwardly, which was something I wanted to do indirectly, by criticizing relatively positive articles about A.G. Cameron's practices in this case. I was just going to hack it to death, but I think our listeners deserved a straightforward look at what all went wrong. And it didn't go wrong by accident or wrong by lack of effort. It went wrong purposely because it was designed, and the prosecutor chose to implement ways that exonerated the police. And that is a crime in itself.
One thing I noticed that's standing out for me is the lack of media coverage on the jurors' tapes. First of all, I had no idea that tapes were released.
Yep.
And I do know and remember us reporting that the Attorney General Cameron was trying to get anything stopped, from being released from his grand jury presentation. So that surprises me. I mean, their silence on that is complicit in the outcome as well.
And let me go deeper on what you just said. The media in the CNN news article, where we eventually get to the idea that he was trying to prevent the release of the tapes, the article itself begins with him saying that he's willing to do this even though it was an uncharacteristic thing that they do in the legal thing. Like he was bending over backwards to be nice and adhere to the juror's request to have it all released. When at the end of the article you read, he did try to stop it. He wasn't interested in pressing it forward. So again, that's CNN, white domination racist media, manipulating their readers into believing that he was bending over backwards to be exposing and open as to the concerns of this juror. And that was a bold-faced lie.
In my understanding, it was redacted even after it was released.
And that was also in that article too, that CNN article, where the only thing that was delaying him releasing it was the fact that he had to redact the personal information of the people. When you find out in this Miss Holloway's article that they did that, plus they also omitted what he exactly was instructing the jury to consider. And that is powerful, again, a manipulation.
So not only is he protecting the officers, he's protecting himself and what he did in that grand jury,
as well as the media's attempt to also hide from their readers what he was doing in that grand jury. This is what is systematic white domination racism. Plain and simple. That's what's going on here. And he's their golden fair-haired boy through the Republican side bringing it in. And that's why I also brought out in our exchange with Ms. Holloway the fact that Kamala Harris had her similar rise to power by doing the same exact thing in California, but on the rise to the Democratic track to the rise to power.
So the prosecutors, and we touched on it, the prosecutors, the judges, the entire system,
it's messed up.
It's designed to not protect and serve, but to destroy the lives of the people that they're elected oftentimes to serve. Of course, we know that there's bias and injustice in the system. It's systemic.
Yep.
No matter what Mitch McConnell, no matter what William Barr or Donald Trump says, it is in our system. And they've said otherwise. Prosecutors, and I didn't realize it, have much more power a lot of times than these judges.
Yeah. And again, this is by design. Our system is designed on a class level, which legitimizes class approaches to solving some things, is to make sure and ensure that the poor ultimately do not get justice. So judges and prosecutors interlace with determining outcomes. Here, the prosecution can, again, on one side, they can indict a ham sandwich. At the same time, they can make a steak or a lobster bisque if they want to out of a case. And they have the power in which to do so in order to shape a case before it even gets before a judge, who will then apply what they do it. And then people have the outcomes they like or they don't like. Usually the poor get outcomes they don't like. And particularly to America's historically despised group, Black American ADOS, this is another resulting outcome we don't like. For the obvious reasons, justice has not been served.
So in the end, even though his star is going to rise, he cannot be trusted to impartially continue to prosecute people.
He's really tainted if you're being a purist from the legal sense. He's tainted as a prosecutor. Several years ago, a prosecutor out of Philadelphia was caught on tape saying that he had the power to massage an all-right jury or to not allow black jurors to sit on it. And it blew up. A lot of people paid attention to that. I don't know what fixes have taken place then. Here, A.G. Cameron is displaying the same behavior with designing information that goes to the jury while he's claiming to the public they were able to see all of it. It was all a lie, a bold-faced lie. And CNN and other white domination racist media can't be surprised that they're not covering it as a lie, while the local media, as we read in our last articles of ADOS, said he was outright lying. And so that's the standard that needs to be attained here for anybody from any political persuasion, because that is in line with the issue of justice. Which is why, again, I really love the ADOS movement, because they're talking about the check, but they're also talking about the structural changes to capitalism and also the criminal injustice system that needs to take place in a reparations movement. Again, we cover all the bases. If this was a just society, A.G. Cameron would have charges against him right now for malfeasance.
Yeah, so it's important to down ballot vote. You're a good prosecutor. There are prosecutors that are fair and impartial and don't seek to protect those that they deem are worth saving. Apparently, this particular AG feels that protecting the police officers and not the victims that they murder. So, I know here locally our prosecutors is up for re-election. If you feel that his opponent is a better option and that can better serve, please vote for them. Same should be happening in your community, wherever you're living right now. They're on the ballots. Vote better people in these positions.
Also, and I thank you for taking that tact, because this should be an explosion. And the aftershock should be, everybody should be paying closer attention to what's going on with these secret jurors and grand juries that are set up, especially if the prosecutor has a history of being shady. We cannot sit back on our laurels and hope that people will get from the shockwave a hope that people will just do better. Pressure needs to be applied. People need to be covering this. We need to be acting like citizens, not consumers. And because we've been lulled into being consumers for so long, we've allowed Republicans and Democrats to act in ways that serve the interest of power. And the power is in the interest of white conservative elites that they ultimately bend to in order to ascend politically. We need to put a stop to it. We need to act like citizens and confront prosecutors when they're doing this. Because like we need an audit of the banks and how they treat black people, we need an audit of the criminal justice system. We already know the obvious egregious and atrocities they predict, but we don't know deep things like prosecutors and what they do to manipulate outcomes that ultimately mean horrible things for ADOS life.
We're coming to get our check.
There you have it, another week, another show. Thanks for joining us on the Articles of ADOS podcast. Make sure to visit our website, articlesofados.com, where you can join our mailing list and see the show notes for today's episode.
Be sure to tune in next Friday for a new episode of Undiscussed News you may have missed. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send us an email to listeners@articlesofados.com.
And remember, you can catch us live at 10 a.m. every Friday on WCRS 92.7 and 98.3 here in Columbus, Ohio. Also head over to our Patreon page to support the podcast as we give you weekly news and information important to our community. Until next time, family, stay safe and stay strong. Peace.
We're coming to get our check. We're coming to get our check.